I do mostly land use mediation, which means that I help people reach agreements about land use and development. And if you know anything about land use and development, you know there's a lot of conflict in it. So ultimately what I help people do is learn how to reach agreement with themselves, and my job is mostly to get them to listen. So I do a lot of that by modeling good listening and then hopefully asking some pointed questions. So tonight what I hope I'm going to do is fairly at a nice pace walk you through some stimulating ideas that will then allow you to speak with each other, because my takeaway from this visit is that after I leave, you'll be able to say, well, you know that guy Edwards, that was an interesting thing he said. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I want to talk about that more. I want to dig into that a little bit more and explore it. Because we're not going to solve any problems tonight. But you do have a lot of problems that you can't solve, but it will, I think, take all of you to help solve them. So that's my basic agenda, and if you will just allow me to walk through this, I'll get started, okay? So I am a businessman. I started a nonprofit business, and the name of it's Justice and Sustainability Associates about 15 years ago. It's based in Washington, D.C. And the reason I started is because I wanted to test whether you could create, promote, advocate, work for justice and sustainability in the marketplace. And the work that we chose my colleagues and I have been promoting is based on a mission that says what we want to do is bring developers, residents, and regulators together to reach just and sustainable decisions about land use. We chose land use, as I said, because land use has a lot of embedded conflict in it. And the reason why land use has so much embedded conflict in it has to do with the different narratives that are attached to land. There's probably a different narrative about Grand Rapids and the land that it represents for every one of you in the room. If I were to ask you, tell me what Grand Rapids means to you, your narrative is going to be defined by the life experience you have, what you brought here, what you take away from here, and how you experience this land, and all the things that are on the land and under the land and around the land. But it helps to talk about it in that way, because not only does it help you to appreciate there are a lot of differences, but it also helps you appreciate all of the work that has to go into reaching agreement, so that when you think about what should be done with any place, whether you're building something or putting in a road or creating a waterfront, there's a lot you have to take into consideration, a lot of people's thoughts and history and thinking. And if you don't do that, it's very hard then to get to equity or justice, and it's very hard to get to economic development that helps lift a lot of boats. So that's the basic premise, that in order to get there, you've got to have some prerequisites. One of the things that I love about this particular slide, this image, is that it kind of surfaces some of the important words. One of those words is struggle. It's a struggle to build a beloved community. And so I'll ask the first rhetorical question, and I'll have a few of them that I'll throw out throughout the night. One of those questions is Grand Rapids a beloved community? And then that kind of follows up with, do you want it to be? And then, of course, how much effort are you willing to put in to making that happen? And then what are you willing to trade away? So I'll put those 4 questions there as something to help frame what I hope we'll talk about afterwards and what you'll talk about when I leave. This idea of reconciliation, the reason I like that word is because reconciliation is something that's sort of like being in church. Everybody has to contribute. You can't really reconcile yourself before you acknowledge your histories, your narratives. And in order for people to acknowledge their narratives, they got to feel like it's safe to talk about them. So I'm talking now about the process of setting a table or creating a room and a space in which the possibility of reconciliation exists. And then you have to actually do the work of reconciling. And reconciling means aligning. It's aligning history, it's aligning the future, it's aligning your present. It's learning how to talk not in order to be different, not in order to hurt, not in order to reject, but to figure out a way to share. That's really what reconciliation is supposed to lead to, sharing. So I wanted to put this up. I'm from South Carolina. I grew up under segregation. I want to put that word out there. I'm going to keep putting words out because as someone who believes we can't really talk about our life stories if we don't use the words that matter, segregation matters a lot to me. If you grew up in South Carolina, in Charleston, where I grew up, during the time I grew up, you have to be able to talk about segregation. You have to talk about Jim Crow. So there are lots of things, lots of words that I think you'll hopefully learn to become comfortable about if you're going to seize the opportunity that all of your future in Grand Rapids offers. One of the things that I've done in going around with Chris today is talked about the fact that you've got assets here, physical assets at least. I know about some of the financial assets. You've got lots of social assets. But you've got assets here that some communities would give their right arms, both of their legs, to have. But it really doesn't matter if you have all those assets and you don't have your oars pulling in the same direction. And that question of pulling your oars in the same direction is what we're going to talk more about, because another way of thinking about what the purpose of reconciliation is, to me becomes not so much do you want a beloved community, because that was very much a 60s concept, and I don't know if it's a new concept to you, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. But a more 21st century way to talk about that is this. The question then is, what kind of city do you want Grand Rapids to be? Exclusive or inclusive? So, at some point I'm hoping someone later on will say, well, we want it to be inclusive. Because I don't think you're going to be very successful here if the marketing motto is going to be, Grand Rapids, we're exclusive. I think you have to have a different marketing concept. So if you want it to be inclusive, and there's some benefits to inclusivity, let me tell you that this comes from some work I did in Washington. Who's been to Washington in the last 5 years? Okay, great. You know Washington is right now the bomb. Everybody, people who've been there know that? You know that there are 1,000 people moving to Washington every month, down from 1,500. You know that the city is probably one of the most vibrant markets. The economy, every neighborhood now has got all kinds of diversity occurring in it culturally. People, it used to be that if you lived in Washington and you were white, you never crossed 16th Street, one of the most highly segregated cities in the country. And of course, residential segregation is American as apple pie, but in 2002, we started a process there which basically said that we wanted to make Washington a world-class city. World-class cities have some things in common. One of the things that world-class, if you look across the world, world-class cities have great waterfronts. They have great waterfronts. And that's one of the things that you have the opportunity to do, is have a great waterfront. Now, you can also just have a good waterfront. It could be good. But to go from good to great, that's what I'm asking. Is that something you want to do? My position is, if you want to go from good to great, you're going to want to have an inclusive city, a city that works for all, a city that attracts all, a city that people say, I see myself in the picture, and I want to continue to see myself in the picture, and I want to be able to tell other people to come so they can see themselves in the picture. So, let me just see a show of hands. How many of you can say that? That's a question. How many of you can say, I see myself in the picture of Grand Rapids, I want to see it, I want to tell other people to come and let them see it? Okay. Who doesn't? I didn't see all the hands go up the first time. Who doesn't? Okay, I know who you are. Here's what I'm getting at when I ask that question. This idea of creating the inclusive city, very hard. If you're going to make it work for everybody, first of all, you're going to have to know what everybody wants. You're going to have to respect the fact that maybe they look like you, but they don't actually think like you. You're going to have to respect the fact that you might be on the same side of the fence, but you're on different roads. This idea of inclusivity takes a lot of time to work through only because we have to learn and in some instances create how to create a civic agreement, a civic consensus. And to create a civic consensus is this whole process that you're experimenting now with in terms of creating the waterfront. And, God bless Chris, he's putting in a lot of work into trying to not simply ask you what you want or what you think, but to also introduce the idea that you've got to talk with each other and say, we've got these alternatives, but where do we want it to take us? Where do we want to end up? We build the waterfront, but is the waterfront the only purpose? The waterfront, in my sense, must serve a larger purpose. I don't know. Maybe you've got that all figured out here. It's hard work, and usually people don't have it figured out. So I don't know what Grand Rapids will be like and why you want the waterfront, but in Washington, when we started working on the waterfront down there, a lot of people said, this is never going to happen because this is not for me. They don't want me on the waterfront. They are not going to put all this money and work into building someplace for me. I can get with doing it for someone else, but not for me. So this question of inclusivity means that you think things are for you. The city is for you. Downtown is for you. What you're experiencing is a benefit to you. So I want to talk about some of the things that get you to being able to make decisions that engage people. This is a pretty complex slide, but the reason I use it is because ultimately it reminds us of how complex figuring out how to make decisions that work and will last, so that when you take public dollars, which need to make a return of 50 or more years on the investment, you appreciate all of the different things you've got to think about. And the problem with planning is you can start thinking about what you want to build, but you also have to think about why. Why are you doing it? Why are you creating it? How is it going to make a difference? And that difference has to be measured in a lot of different ways. Who knows about the 5 capitals? Anybody? So there are at least 5 capitals. probably more. So there's finance capital, and everybody knows about that. So there's natural capital. Yeah? Right? Social capital. Who knows about some others now? You see where I'm going?
Knowledge capital.
Intellectual capital. What else? There's material capital. There's the built environment. This building represents capital. Where we are in the world now is that we can assign value to all these capitals. So it's no longer sufficient just to say we want everybody to be wealthy, or we want to just talk about money or income distribution or jobs. All the different capitals that we know about now have value, which means that this conversation about decision making has gotten more complex. And in order to participate in decision making about it, you've got to really, really do some homework. You've got to talk to your people and make sure they understand what the conversation is about, and then you've got to invite them to talk to other people who may have a different view, but you've got to do all of that talking. You've got to really get to where you created a process that will reflect your values. Now, here's a question. Is there any word up here? Accountability, justice, beneficence, non-malfeasance, choose, integrity. Anybody got any problems with any of those words? You see any words up there that give you heartburn? Like, is anyone in here who says, no, I'm not for integrity? The reason I'm asking is because if we are in fact going to go down a road where we honor these words and what they represent, we're going to be able to create an inclusive community where all the neighborhoods are neighborhoods of choice and all votes get floated to some extent. But you also know it's going to take some serious time. It's going to take some work. But it can be done, and there are models for doing it. I talk a lot about building consensus, and the reason why I talk about it so much is win, lose paradigms, I don't think are useful. Everybody's got to be a winner, because as soon as someone loses, they're going to either push back from the table or they're going to stay there until they can scheme a way to beat you the next time. And ultimately, that doesn't move the needle. It doesn't move the needle in our communities. We've got to figure out a way where everybody wins. Oh, Edwards, that's easy for you to say. When's the last time you all thought about making sure that everybody wins? I mean, there's a whole history of civilization that has to do with winners and losers. So is that a value that you can endorse? Everybody wins? You know, when you talk about equity and development and floating all boats, and going from good to great, I think you got to figure out a way for everybody to win. The thing about consensus is that you literally have to build it. A lot of the work that I do is about getting people to go beyond what they thought they could go, where they thought they could go. Everybody comes in with an idea of what win means for them, but the real change that consensus represents is when other people win, you actually can win too. That's going beyond your definition of winning. When other people win, you don't have to lose. So I'm a big one for building consensus, but consensus takes time. And as Chris would tell you, if I said, Chris, what are some of the things we have to talk about when we're building consensus? You would say?
Oh boy, land use.
We would say land use, and we would talk about the texts, right? One of the things that's a very big issue in building consensus is the subtext. There's the pretext, the text, the context, the post-text. The hardest work is the subtext. all the things that we don't like to talk about anymore. I've heard some of the folks from the audience earlier in a meeting we did earlier today. I've now experienced Western Michigan nice. And I've done Wisconsin nice, I've done Minnesota nice, I've done Iowa nice. This is really a thing. I have to honestly say I'm impressed by the fact that this Midwestern nice thing is real. But you gotta move in a direction that allows you to do the consensus building work, which begins with recognizing differences. This is a cute little slide. This is the District of Columbia, and every one of these is a project that I've worked on over the last 15 years. But it's really the things on the side. Agreeing on the text, defining the end first. This is what I meant by asking you not what you're going to do, but why you're going to do it. Why you're going to do it so that it's like, one of the gentlemen who was in the audience said they talked about an unwritten vision or unwritten expectation. Well, I got to tell you, if it's not written, it can't be evaluated. It can't be measured. And you don't actually have agreement until it's written. So defining the end result, but the one I like a lot is honoring the disagreements. It's important that we recognize on the way to building consensus that there are disagreements. And building consensus is not about everybody agreeing. It's about everybody recognizing that this is something that I gotta have, that you gotta have if I'm gonna get what I gotta have. Let me say that again. Consensus is recognizing that there's something that you've gotta have, and I've gotta help you get that so I can get what I gotta have. That's really what it kind of boils down to. And there's a set of disagreements that go along with that. And really helping explore and honor the disagreements creates a lot more trust. Because people then know that, I know you don't agree with me on that, but we can figure out a way to agree about something. Managing democratic urges. Let me just tell you that there's nothing that can kill progress more than too much democracy. You at some point have got to stop planning and implementing. You start implementing. You got to build it. You got to make a success translate from paper to the real world. And there comes a point where a lot of what I believe is my job is to make sure that you get it done. You get it. This has got to stop. We're talking this into the ground. We've got to make some decisions, spend some money, put some concrete in the ground. It's got to be done. So you don't want to spend too much time twirling around. And then this is the most important one. Effort doesn't mean anything. The only thing that counts is results. And results can be measured. Effort, feels good, but it's results. I talked today earlier about your metrics. What are the things that you have set that you will be evaluated against? And I don't believe that you can make progress unless you have a driver of metrics. There's got to be something that says in 20 years, in 10 years, this is what we're going to have achieved. Whether it's income distribution or access to the economy. I was asking Chris earlier today, I think it's, if you take the Spanish-speaking population, the African-American population, you add them up, that's about 40% of the population, round number. So does that mean that the metric should be that 40% of the participation in the economy is by African-Americans and Latinos? I don't know, I'm just asking. That could be a metric. Some people would say that that's a representative way to think about it. Goal setting. I don't know. If you don't have those ways of defining your results, though, I think it makes it much harder to credibly invite people to give up the time you're giving up tonight. These are not, this hour and a half, you're not ever going to get back. So how do you translate that into something that is actually going to end up in a result that matters to you? If it matters, you can measure it. So now I want to talk about what the actual practical work is. So this is an example of infrastructure. And we got infrastructure here in Grand Rapids. This is physical infrastructure. This is financial infrastructure. And I'm sure you got that here too. It's very diverse. You got energy infrastructure. And, I'm sure you got examples of that. This is what I wonder if you've got. Have you got civic infrastructure? If you don't have a lot of civic infrastructure, it is very hard to build consensus. And of course, you can have infrastructure for your neighborhood. You can have your neighborhood civic association. You can even have different forums that pull different people together. I understand there are lots of committees in Grand Rapids. Lots of people who are meeting. Here's my question about civic infrastructure. Does civic infrastructure exist that actually builds consensus and moves the needle on progress? Because like all infrastructure, you make an investment in the infrastructure, you want the infrastructure to pay off. You build a road, you want the road to work. If you put up a power line, you want energy transmitted. If you put your ATM card in the bank, you want your money to come out. The infrastructure has to work. If you have good civic infrastructure, you're going to have a great community, and your community will be vibrant and healthy and reflect the vibrance and health of your civic infrastructure. So if you were to say in Grand Rapids, well, we don't have great civic infrastructure, I would say, well, you're going to need to create that. You're going to need to invest in that. You're going to need to build it if you're going to achieve some of the things I've talked about already. So now, let me dig a little deeper. This is a lady I know. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm going to just let you assume. I go to cities all over the world, and there are people like this lady. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm one of a handful of African Americans who can actually identify their pre-emancipation ancestors. I know who my enslaved great-great-grandfather was. And because I know that, I can tell you that I know he dreamed of me way back 150, 160 years ago. And everybody in here, somebody dreamed of. Believe me, literally, you are here because somebody dreamed of you. And when I say they dreamed of you, I don't mean that they were asleep and they had a picture of you. But they dreamed of their future generations who would be better off with them. You guys know that? You know that you're somebody's dream come true. I know. And one of the things that I like to talk about is you never know who you're talking to. You never know who you're talking to. And you never know what dream they represent. And you don't know what you're risking by discarding or discounting. And you really have to pay serious attention to the work when we talk about civic infrastructure that goes into creating a place, an opportunity, a process for that dream to be honored. The dreams that we are representing here in this room to be honored. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So, I think this is a pretty cool slide. When I asked my assistant to put it together, I said, no, it's got to have the diversity. You got to have the diversity of all the different ways that people get engaged. How many people in here have been engaged? Come on, been engaged. So, you've had the experience of someone saying that you matter to me. I want to spend my life with you. I think you're the cat's pajamas. I'm like ready to go the distance. And that's what these symbols represent. It's a big deal when you think about all the different things. To get there, to get to this, well, you meet someone, they're a stranger. But something happened. Something happened. And then you get to know each other, you start talking. And the talking goes, maybe you meet the family members, start hanging out. And then you decide to put your cards on the table and asking people to trust you, invest, and believe in what you're saying. The reason why I'm talking about all of that is because of this lady. What she's doing, everybody knows. I know what she's doing. Because I was in the room when this was going on. But really what I'm trying to talk about here is how do you get people to believe? How do you get people to believe? You folks who got engaged to someone, how did they get you to believe? They did some things. They demonstrated some things. They showed you some things. They said some things. They got you to believe that you really cared about them. Why don't you think about that? You really cared about them. You had their interests at heart. And not for just the short term, but for the rest of your life. That's pretty deep. I use that to talk about this. Social equity, achieving sustainable economic development can't be done by outreach. Can't be done. You can engage people. You can get them to believe that you have their interests, but it can't be done by outreach. It can't be done by meetings where you invite people to come here tonight. And I'm not being critical of this. What I'm saying is, you can do this, or you can do that. And obviously, I'm a big proponent of engagement. And I mean systematic, consistent, dependable, predictable engagement that get people to believe that you care about them. I love this slide. We can talk about any of these, but the one that I like the most, which one do I like the most? You've been listening to me for a few minutes now. Which one is the one I like the most? Cultivated ignorance. Who said that? You got it. You got it. Believe me. Everybody knows exactly what cultivated ignorance is. I didn't know. Hell, this is 2014. How is it you don't know something? There is nothing we don't know anymore that's worth knowing. If you don't know it, it's because you don't want to know. That's a hard statement, but I mean it. And this cultivation of ignorance costs so much money, costs so much time. It slows things down so much. The inability to acknowledge what we know and therefore what we must do. Really, it's just like, it gets really close to number 4. It just is a lot of hypocrisy. So I really I want it to be possible that you understand that these are deadly. These behaviors, these ways of thinking. Apathy, I don't like apathy, but cultivated ignorance drives me crazy. And it's something we've all got to take responsibility to reject. I don't care where you live, east side, west side. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter where you started. We don't live in a world anymore where you can say you don't know. You may not care, but it's not possible not to. In Washington, D.C., we are coming to the end of an administration that committed itself to creating one city. This is the D.C. Convention Center. You guys got a big convention center here. This is 2,000 people. And another 300 online. And this is an example of an investment about $700,000 in participatory decision making that basically addressed education, health, infrastructure investments. Well, all these people are sitting at little tables, and there's a table facilitator for each of them. This is what's possible. This isn't even the biggest. I've done these where there were 5,000 people. You can scale these up, you can scale them down, but you can't say, I don't know what people think. I don't know what people want. It's not possible to say that anymore. There are ways to know. And then the question becomes, do you want one city? Do you want one city? I think if you're going to go from good to great, that's what you got to answer. And here's why I think it's important. I'm coming to the end now. Your demographics, wherever you live, doesn't matter whether it's Grand Rapids or any other part of the world or the country, this is your future family. This is your future family. Sooner or later, this is everybody in here's future family. Whether you say it again, I'm not making this up. You know I'm not making it up. This is where everybody's family is going. Now, why are those people smiling? Why are they smiling? What have they figured out? Well, I don't know. But if it's your family, you should know. You should be able to say, my family's going to have smiles like that. And reflect that level of diversity. And I don't know whether it's your physical family, it could be your work family, it could be any number of families, but that's where we're going. So just to end up where we started, this is a definition that Martin King gave to the beloved community in the 60s. And you all know that this concept predates him, goes back to Gandhi. So to update this concept, you can substitute a lot of different things. You can substitute all kinds of words, you can add words. But the value here is, I mean, it sounds a little corny, but there's only 2 words. Well, 3. Me, I say loved or loving in community. And I think that's still very legitimate as well. And whatever this work that you're doing in Grand Rapids is, to me, that should be your goal. That's the why. Now to get there, I've already said, it takes time and won't be easy. You have to take a leap of faith. So when you leave here tonight, say, Edward's good boy. Thanks. It takes a leap of faith. You gotta figure out how to depend on each other and lean on each other and recognize that you're all putting your pants on one leg at a time and Get out that as a starting point. And when you do that, when you take the leap of faith and you put in the work and you commit yourself to being a loving community, you will no longer have to invite guys like me to talk about social equity or economic development, because really all it is sharing and caring. That's really all that boils down to. It's not that complex. We can talk all night about strategies, but you live here. You know what needs to be done. And I'll come back if you want. We can talk about strategies. But here's what I would suggest you do. Let's keep it real simple. Be a light. Be a light. You are surrounded by forces of darkness. I gave you a list of them. To counter all of that, you want Grand Rapids to be all that it can be and all that it should be and all that you deserve it to be. If you want to go from good to great, be a light, and make sure that everybody else has a light. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for your attention.